I grew up in New Orleans, and the sounds that meant home to me were seagulls, tugboats pushing barges through, their horns blasting, a drawbridge horn, ships coming through, the sounds of the city traffic. I lived in a blue collar neighborhood, so one of the sounds on the weekends, especially, were young guys drag racing on the streets. There were the sounds of Mardi Gras, of parades and bands, and one of my favorite sounds was of Ned. He drove a produce truck. He would go to the French Quarter early in the morning, and then he would go up and down the streets of my neighborhood yelling out what he had to offer that day: plantains, tomatoes, bananas.
These sounds of my mother's youth in New Orleans differ greatly from the sounds I hear now, which are different as well from the sounds I heard growing up. I grew up in rural Missouri, later living in Evanston, Illinois, and then Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. But now I live in New York City. My classmates and I worked on the Konsult project last fall, as I was slowly getting used to the city while my husband started a new job there and I was actually still working in Wisconsin. And the immediate difference I noticed was the noise. In New York, you hear sirens, car horns, jackhammers, barking dogs, endless construction, and people are realizing this is very, very bad for our health. Studies have shown that noise keeps us from sleeping, spikes stress hormones, boosts our risk for heart disease and hypertension and dementia, hurts memory and reading comprehension, particularly huge for kids in the city. But there are several ongoing projects and studies right now that are using technology in the city to measure noise, create maps. There are sensors placed around New York City right now. Since this noise pollution is something that so often feels outside of our control, Erica Walker, an exposure scientist at Harvard University, studies how people are affected by noise and has pointed out that poorer communities tend to be both louder and have greater amounts of low-frequency sounds. In her talks with residents of low-income areas in Boston, she says people reported that they weren't just bothered by the noise they heard, but specifically by the noise they felt. My Konsult looks at noise pollution, not just how it can be an environmental catastrophe and what gets lost when noise surrounds us and there's no room for quiet, but also how when examining noise, we can't just look to the negative and completely abate noise pollution. Armory Schaefer suggests seeking a way to make environmental acoustics a positive study program and asks, what sounds do we want to preserve, encourage, and multiply? And this plays into my Konsult project because sometimes those lines can blur.
When I moved to Missouri at the age of 25, I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. There really were very few sounds at night. So I felt really alone and isolated. I never did get used to that house, but eventually we moved to a house on a frontage road of an interstate highway. I would hear the traffic going to and fro. I would hear horns. I would hear heavy truck sounds. And for some reason that was comforting to me, and it made me feel less isolated. And that became the soundscape of my home for 13 years.